Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Dwayne Fuchs. I'm a registered kinesiologist and ergonomist from our Thunder Bay Clinic, and Melissa Statham is a ergonomist from our Windsor Clinic. We are going to present today on ergonomics and occupational cleaners. It's a very, at this point in time, this subject is important at all times in terms of the fact that there's many disciplines and many occupations that involve these types of tasks, custodians, PSWs, housekeepers, all those types of um, types of professions. But in this last couple of years with the pandemic, cleaning, both occupationally and without, with the pandemic, cleaning is at the forefront, obviously, for everybody. So even if individuals are not being employed to do these types of tasks on a regular basis, we've all ended up doing a little bit more of these tasks than we had in the past. Um, Today's presentation, we're going to deal with musculoskeletal disorders and risk factors, commonly injured areas for occupational cleaners, ergonomic design principles. We're going to then get into some lifting and manual material handling, reaching and bending, and finally, vibration and how it's involved in occupational cleaning. So what is a musculoskeletal disorder? It's basically your body's made up of muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints, discs, and other tissues. Those tissues and that whole system is considered the musculoskeletal system. Musculoskeletal disorders are injuries or disorders to this system and to the structures within the system. And these injuries are generally due to a variety of different risk factor exposures. So examples of various musculoskeletal disorders are things such as neck strains, shoulder bursitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, rotator cuff tendonitis, tennis elbow, back strain, anything that obviously affects the musculoskeletal system. So what are the hazards that potentially increase your chances of obtaining a musculoskeletal disorder? There's several different hazards, different things that can lend themselves to increasing the risk of obtaining a musculoskeletal disorder. Repetition is one. Basically, it's performing a task several times with limited amount of rest or recuperation time. Force, any type of force. I mean, that can be a force that is being exuded by the individual, such as having to lift or push or pull something, but it's also the force of gravity. Anything that that's basically pushing against the body as well is considered as force. Postures, static postures, any posture that's held for an extended period of time. And it doesn't matter what that posture, but anything that's held for long, extended period of time is considered a static posture. And this as well places stress upon the musculoskeletal system. Contact stress. Contact stress is actually a form of force. It's basically when a structure of your body is in contact with something else for an extended period of time. For instance, right now, every individual that's attending this is undergoing some sort of contact stress somewhere. If you're standing up, you have contact stress on your feet. If you're sitting down, there's contact stress on your buttocks and your hamstrings. If your elbows are resting down on a surface, there's contact stress there as well. And the contact stress can include blood supply and nerve supply to the structures. Awkward postures. Any posture that deviates from what we term as neutral is considered an awkward posture. Neutral posture is basically having your joint angles trying to hover around 90 degrees or 180 degrees. So from a standing position, a neutral posture is basically standing upright with your arms just hanging straight down and allowing your arms to hang straight down in a natural position. Basically, that would be with your palms slightly facing towards you. In a seated position, neutral posture is generally your ankles, your knees, your hips, and your elbows around 90 degrees, while your shoulders, your wrists, and basically the the joint of your neck are in a neutral position of 180 degrees. Anything that deviates from that increases the stress upon your bodily structures. Extreme temperatures. Anything that's outside of the norm in terms of cold or hot also can place additional stresses on the musculoskeletal system because it potentially changes the dynamics of a lot of the other risk factors as well. Vibration. Vibration also places extra stress upon the structures, and vibration is kind of like a, a small combination of very high repetition with with low level forces. So continuing to have either your limbs or your entire body being vibrating increases the chance of of risk to injury because it decreases the amount of recuperation available. And then your psychosocial risk factors, things such as stress, increased mental capabilities, or increased mental requirements. Those types of things also place additional risk upon your physical structures that can lead to the development of a musculoskeletal disorder. So the primary risk factors are generally associated with the physical demands of work activities or just activities in general. Things such as lifting or pushing heavy loads, reaching or bending in awkward postures or deviating from neutral, holding any posture or any position for an extended period of time without rest and without movement, and repetitive movements with limited rest or recuperation time. And it's really important to recognize the synergistic effect or the combination of these risk factors. So at the bottom of the triangle there, you see, if you're subjected to high repetition or higher forces or extended awkward postures, you have some risk. But when you introduce a second risk factor and then a third risk factor, it greatly increases the chance of you obtaining one of these musculoskeletal disorders. And the greater the time you spend under these risk factors, the greater the chance of increasing your injury risk. So there's basically two kinds of different types of musculoskeletal injury mechanisms. The first one is acute. It's an injury that happens over a short period of time. And basically, it's when the load and the forces placed upon the body are too great for your body tissues to withstand. So the greater the load that you have, if it's past your margin of safety, inevitably you end up with tissue failure and injury. Or cumulative repeated injury mechanisms are basically when you've continued to do a certain movement, repetition, under certain levels of load or forces without having adequate recuperation time. Over time, over cumulative time, repetitiveness, over that time, eventually you'll end up with tissue failure because without having the rest, the recuperation, and the ability for the tissues to regenerate, eventually you get to a point where there's failure there and you end up with a cumulative type of injury. So the common areas that are injured with occupational cleaners are generally the shoulder, injuries such as tendonitis and bursitis, and obviously everybody's heard of rotator cuff strains. Um, the lower back tends to get injured an awful lot as well in terms of pain, strain, and eventually disc injuries, as well as hand and wrist injuries, carpal tunnel syndrome, and tendonitis from having to utilize your hands and your upper limbs on a regular basis. So the risk factors for shoulder injuries are basically external forces, such as things like lifting, pushing, pulling, having to carry things. Um, your shoulders are very unstable joints. You have an awful lot of movement at your shoulder, and that's a great thing. But because you have an awful lot of movement, you don't have an awful lot of stability. So it's very taxing upon the shoulder joint and the mechanisms within the shoulder when you have to impart either continuous forces or large forces. Sustained awkward postures in terms of things reaching overhead, reaching forward, laterally, um, extended external or internal rotations also increase the risk of injuring your shoulder. And then obviously, any type of repeated arm movements. Any movement that you make with your arms affects your shoulders, even if you do not believe you're moving at the shoulder joint itself. Keep that in mind. It's very, very important. Okay. And then the increase in any of those factors, posture, repetition, and force, greatly increases your chance of injury. Lower back injury risk factors, again, same things: force, awkward postures, and repeated motions. Lifting, pushing, pulling, holding, lowering. It's very important for people to realize that the lowering component and the negative resistant component of force, so for instance, actually having to lower a weight or lower an object, is as taxing and even sometimes more taxing on the musculoskeletal system than the movement of actually having to make that object move in the first place. Very important to remember that. Okay, sustained awkward postures of bending, stooping, twisting, those types of things also place great stress on your torso, as well as repeated torso movements. And again, increased risk factors by increasing the combination or the magnitude of any of those risk factors increases your chance of injury. And lastly, the hand and wrist risk factors. Having to impart force in terms of using a pinch grip or a power grip, anything that you're using your hands for, where you're opening and closing your hands. Uh, Awkward postures such as wrist deviations, flexions, extensions, uh, pronation, supination, ulnar deviation, all of those things are placing increased risk on those structures. And again, the repeated hand arm movements increase the chance of injury. Now, if we look back slightly, okay, to the shoulders and the back, all of those things that you're doing, you need to keep in mind that generally you're doing them with your hands, right? So they're all connected. It's very difficult to impart force using your torso and your back or your shoulders without somehow utilizing your hands as well. Okay, so it's very important to realize that a lot of these injuries don't occur by themselves. Okay, so ergonomic design principles, we want to be looking at in all aspects of life and work, but in this particular instance, in terms of occupational cleaners, we want to minimize heavy lifting or high forces. Try to minimize reaching and bending, as well as any other awkward postures. Okay. We need to attempt to minimize repetition and prolonged or static postures. Okay. Very important that we want to try to minimize those things in order to decrease the risk factors. Okay. So manual material handling is something that's done by a good portion of individuals, regardless of whether it's in an occupational setting or not in an occupational setting. It involves and includes manually lifting, carrying, lowering, pushing, and pulling things. Okay. A lot of injuries that occur because of manual material handling are musculoskeletal in nature. They're gradual over time, or they happen as a one-time overexertion. Okay. So you need to keep in mind that it can be both acute or cumulative. Okay. It's the most common cause of lower back pain. Okay. In terms of straining your back, eventually leading to disc issues, those types of things. 3 out of 4 Canadians whose jobs entail manual material handling eventually at some point suffer from some sort of back pain. Not necessarily a major back injury, but back pain. Every year, thousands of people are permanently disabled due to back injuries. It's extremely important to remember this. Okay, so then very quickly, I'm just going to end with going through a little bit of the ergonomics of lifting. So in terms of manual material handling, it's basically handling anything, moving things around. Okay, it's important to know safe lifting principles that will help keep your back healthy and comfortable. Okay, a good thing to remember is the acronym BACK. When lifting or moving an object, try to keep your back straight or in a neutral posture. Try to avoid twisting. So in avoiding twisting, what you want to attempt to do is you want to attempt to move your feet. And I like to tell people the best way you can think about that is picture yourself walking on ice that's really slippery. When you walk on ice that's really slippery, you don't push off really hard with one leg. You kind of you move your feet up and down and slowly move everything as one unit. That's what you should be thinking about doing all the time when you're carrying something and or moving. So try to avoid that twisting. Try to keep whatever object it is that you're lifting and or moving close to your body, as well as make sure that the movement, whether it be the lowering portion, the raising portion, the pushing or the pulling portion, try to keep those movements as smooth as possible so that you're doing it and you're imparting force gradually.
Looking at manual material handling duties like Dwayne just talked about, the lifting, lowering, pushing, pulling, and carrying in relation to duties that occupational cleaners perform. So we took some of the common duties. There may be more to this list, I'm sure there is, but these are relatively the ones that are done among most occupational cleaners. So we looked at garbage, mopping, furniture and supplies, the supply cart itself, shoveling snow, vacuuming, making beds, and using floor scrubbers and polishers, those types of machines. And what we're going to do is just, look at those risk factors that are involved and some recommendations to make these tasks easier and reduce exposure to these risk factors. So when we look at garbages specifically, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't overfill garbages. Often we have large containers, we put the bags in there and until it's full is when they're emptied. This can cause for like extremely heavy weights to be, pulled out of the garbage can and lifted to the dumpster. What you can do with these large containers is put what's called a false bottom in it. So something, like a foot up in the garbage container that the garbage is actually going to sit on. This will reduce the amount of garbage that can be put into the container, therefore reducing the weight that the custodian or occupational cleaner is lifting. You could also use a strategy of small or medium trash containers because the smaller receptacle is only going to be able to hold so much. So inevitably, the load that's going to be lifted will be lighter. Also, you can empty them frequently. So the more frequently you empty them, the less that's going to be in them. So if that's a strategy that you can employ, it would be better just to avoid all those lifting duties, especially lifting heavy weights. Also, as Dwayne noted in the lifting techniques, you want to test something before you lift it. You don't want to just lift something because you never really know what's in the garbage. And if it's something that is quite heavy, you could have those forces spike, and we don't want that. So just make sure you test whatever you're going to lift before you just, pull it out of the can. And be aware of that suction effect. I think everybody's probably gone and emptied the garbage in their house and it is like stuck and you're really having to pull to get that bag out of the receptacle. Well, that's because of the inability for air to transfer into the bottom of the receptacle. So just in the picture in the bottom here, you can see how they drilled some holes in the sides, just to allow that airflow and eliminate that suction effect. So not only are occupational cleaners having to empty garbages within different locations in a building, but they also need to transport these bags of garbage to a larger dumpster. So how do you do that? Well, if you have a cart or some type of there's large containers that you can push with all of the garbage bags in it out to the dumpster, that is definitely advantageous. If you don't, you want to make sure you carry more light compact bags and you're just going to have to make a few more trips. But what's important to remember is when you go out to these dumpsters, they often have a lid on top of them. Ideally, you want to have something that's going to prop open this lid and hold it for you, because if not, the occupational cleaner is going to be holding the lid with one hand while he or she reaches down and lifts and throws the bags in with the other. These lids can often be very heavy. They can have stiff hinges because they sit outside typically in weather, so rust can develop. So there's different techniques you could use. You could get a step stool outside that would allow you to get higher up to place the garbages in, but that does create another safety concern. And you also would want to make sure that you step down in order to get the garbage each time, because if not, you're going to be flexing your trunk down in order to retrieve it too. So there are different garbage areas that are more out in a dock. So when you pull the garbage out, the dumpster is actually lower. So that's also, a kind of a good setup too. If not, you want to definitely make sure you have that locking hinge lid because it will allow you to use both hands and get into a better posture when you're handling the garbage bags. So this diagram here is just showing you that kind of hinge support that will prop open the lid and hold it for you while then you will throw the garbage in. You want to again make sure you're not throwing multiple bags at a time. And then also this apparatus at the bottom, this garbage can, it's a way that you would eliminate that suction effect, right? So you would have a door at the front of the garbage that you could open and then pull the garbage out that way. I mean, obviously you want to make sure you tie it off before you open that door. You'll end up with garbage everywhere, but it's a way to eliminate that increased force and pulling and lifting that is associated with that suction effect and removing garbage from the top rather than the side. Mop buckets are another piece of equipment that is lifted by occupational cleaners. And in order to try to reduce the manual material handling of this as well as the weight, you want to fill buckets on the custodial cart if possible. Use a hose and it eliminates one of the lifts that you would have to do. You can also only fill it halfway, so the weight in the bucket is a lot less. You might need to put a visual in the bucket, have a fill line that's halfway there, similar to what I did in the bucket down here. Just put a fill line, you know you're going to stop filling it then. And then when you go to empty it, if there's a drain on the floor and you don't have to lift it, that's a great option. If not, you want to make sure that you remove that wringer mechanism because it's quite heavy, and then remove the pail from the custodial cart after that. You can also, if you find it too heavy, you could bail some water out of it before you do that initial lift. Often occupational cleaners in every setting need to deal with moving furniture and supplies, whether it's you're having to do a deep clean and you're actually having to move the furniture in a room, you're having to set up for some type of event, you're going to be, faced with moving awkward, often large pieces of furniture. So how do you do this safely? You can use carts or dollies would help. In this case, make sure that they have the proper wheels. Larger wheels are going to make it easier for the custodian to move. Employ those safe lifting principles that Dwayne talked about. You can always use a partner as well to lift something because sometimes things aren't necessarily heavy, but they're just really awkward. And the awkwardness of it creates postures that go outside of neutral posture, increase the forces on the musculature. So lift those heavy items and large items with a partner if you don't have any type of cart available. And when you go to lift something, again, keep that load close to your body. So just to kind of reiterate those lifting principles, you want to bend with your knees, not your back. Again, it's all about trying to keep that back straight in a neutral posture. Make sure you have a good grip on whatever you're lifting. So ideally, if it has handles, that's a great position that you can get a good power grip on that stock item or that piece of furniture. If not, try to find the best spot on that piece of furniture that you can get a good grip on it. You don't want to twist your torso. You always want to move your feet. As soon as you twist, the forces on the spine increase and they're uneven as well. Anything that's handled frequently when it comes to terms of work organization should be placed at waist or chest level. So what I mean by this is if you have common stock that you go to retrieve frequently throughout the day, you want that stock to be located between waist and chest level, where lighter items that you don't use very often at all, you would want to be above shoulder. Things that are heavier that you don't use very often can be on the ground level. So most occupational cleaners have to push some type of supply cart. The supply cart is very necessary so you're not having to make those trips back and forth. It holds on to any of the equipment that they're using as well as the different chemicals that they use to clean with and often different linens as well. It's important that you don't overload these supply carts. The heavier the cart is, the harder it is going to be to push it, especially that initial force. So when you go to push or pull something, there's two forces. There's an initial and there's a sustained force. Occupational cleaners, there's a lot of initial forces because there's a lot of stopping and starting. So the heavier a cart is, the more force initially that is going to have to be exerted if you overload it. So overloading it can be two things. It can impede your vision as well if you put a lot of stock in front of in front of your line of sight, and it can also increase the forces. So you want to ensure also that you have weight, even weight distribution. You don't want it to be tipsy, and you want to organize the products that you have on the cart according to use. Basically, the most frequent used items you want to be in that zone that you're not going to have to bend over to go to the lower portion of the cart to retrieve them. So just more of a diagram here showing that organization. You kind of have the green and yellow and red zones here that the cart shows in the top diagram. And this is just showing that you want your heaviest items to kind of be in that red zone, especially if they're not used a lot. If they're rarely used, you can put them there. But if it's a heavy item that you go to a lot, then you're going to put it in that green zone. So it's just about organizing the items that you have on your cart according to use. The other aspect of a cart you want to make sure is that it has room on the handle surface for both of your hands. You want to be able to push with both hands, not just one. This again is for even force distribution. Also, when it comes to occupational cleaners, not only are they removing clean items like linens from the cart, they're also putting dirty, soiled linens, garbages onto the cart. So, you're reducing the weight, but then you're increasing the weight of the cart again. So it's important that we remember to empty the trash as often as possible, whether that means you are putting it into the hallway, So whether that means that you're putting it into the hallway and leaving it there and coming back to retrieve it later, you just don't want to have that cart to be overloaded, because you could have that intention at the beginning of the shift that you didn't put much on it, but as the shift continues on and you don't take any of those soiled linens or that garbage from your cart, is going to increase the weight and the force to push it again. With any cart, you want to make sure before you go to move it that the wheels are aligned properly. If you have improper alignment, that initial force is going to spike. So make sure the cart wheels are aligned before you go to push it. When it comes to replenishing the supplies in your cart, you want to do it a few times over the course of the shift. You do not want to load everything that you're going to need with all the linens for all the rooms that you're going to clean at the beginning of the shift. Again, it comes down to the weight that you're putting on the cart. And it's always important to maintain the equipment that you use. So that goes for the supply cart. You want to ensure that the wheels are clean, that the casters are large enough that it's easy to push, that nothing on it is broken. So you're responsible for your equipment. So if you notice that day for some reason it's harder to push, inspect it. Make sure you then uh, report back to your supervisor with any of the problems that you are having with it. Snow shoveling is also something that we see a lot of occupational cleaners having to do. It is very physically demanding, so it's really important that you prepare before you shovel snow. It's almost as if you're going to the gym when you're shoveling snow. So you want to wear the proper attire. You want to have footwear that is going to be you don't want it to be slippery. You don't want to go out to shovel snow in Crocs, for example. You want to have um, a footwear that you're going to get a good grip, and you want to warm up. So maybe do some of the other duties if possible before you go and shovel the snow. Don't just jump right into shoveling snow. Also, you want to consider the type of shovel you're using, and some of the physical aspects of the shovel that you want to look at is the weight. You want the shovel to be lightweight. You want the length of the handle, and whether it's bent or straight is something to consider, because you don't want to get into awkward postures if you have a short handle and you're then having to bend over too much. You want to make sure that the blade on the end of it is going to cut through the snow, so it's going to be easier to push when you're removing it. And you don't want to overfill your shovel. And if anything, if you can push the snow rather than lifting the snow, that's really what you want to do. And when it comes time that you're inevitably going to have to lift some of the snow, maybe when you're at the end, you definitely don't want to lift snow and throw it over your shoulder. You want to face whatever you're lifting, bend your knees, pick it up, and then throw it in front of you. Throwing it over your shoulder creates awkward shoulder and torso postures. The recommended rate of scooping snow is about 15 per minute. And when you've been outside shoveling for about 15 minutes, you really do need to take a 2 to 3 minute break, because again, it's very physically exhausting shoveling snow. So take that into consideration. It is like going to the gym, so take breaks throughout the cycle. Vacuuming is another activity that is done quite often by occupational cleaners, requiring that pushing and pulling motion. When it comes to vacuuming, you want to make sure that the vacuum you're using is lightweight. You want to empty the canister or the bag frequently, again, because the heavier the vacuum is, the more force is going to have to be exerted rather when you push it. So if you can get a lighter vacuum and you empty the canister often, it's going to keep that weight manageable. You also want to choose the proper height setting for carpet conditions. If you do this, it's just going to be easier to push the vacuum on that surface. And when it comes to terms of like how you're going to align your body to the vacuum, is that you want to face it directly. You don't want to be twisting your back or your shoulders and pushing it to the side. You want to face it. You want to try to be in neutral posture as much as possible. You want to move your feet. You want to hold that cord with your opposite hand, so then it's not creating a tripping hazard either. And you want to make sure too, if it's a gross motor activity, so you should be able to try to use your other hand. That way it can kind of give a break to the other side of your body. So when you're selecting a vacuum, you want to look at something that's lighter weight. Self-propelled is great too. Obviously, then it's going to help with the force in reducing it. An ergonomic type of handle or some type of a grip on the handle. And you can look at alternative vacuums like a backpack vacuum. On the left here, I have an example of a backpack vacuum that is used more in industrial settings. And what you want to do is you want to ensure the proper fit. It needs to be tight to the body, otherwise the looseness of it is going to create other forces. You want to ensure that the employee using it has proper training because there should be not a lot of bending when using it. So you want to, anytime you introduce any new piece of equipment to an employee, they should be trained on the proper use. And you also want to empty it frequently. Again, I think I've said this with everything. The more frequently you empty it, the weight is going to decrease and the less force you're going to be pushing or pulling or lifting. Making beds is often done by several different occupations, and it can be quite physical in nature because you're having to lift that mattress. The mattresses can weigh up to 100 pounds. This type of tool here is a mattress lifting tool. It wedges between the box spring and the mattress, and it holds it up at the corner so then you can take that fitted sheet and secure it around the mattress. You want to make sure you use fitted sheets because fitted sheets are going to typically stay. I mean, I think we've all had that moment where you get one corner secure and you try to do the other and the other one flips up on you. But for the most part, they should stay in place compared to like a flat sheet. There's been a study done that looked at this type of tool in use with fitted sheets, and it was found to reduce the number of mattress lifts and lowered the perceived exertion among hotel room cleaners. Looking at floor polishers and scrubbers, this type of machines, you want to ensure that they're lightweight in construction. The handle height should be adjustable so that way you can maintain neutral posture. It really comes down to maintaining neutral posture when using a lot of equipment because then the forces are going to be the lowest at the joints. When it comes to triggers, you want to make sure the activation of a trigger is not just a one finger activation. You want it spread over as many fingers as possible, um, just because it's easier. If you have to have one finger on a trigger the whole time, it becomes quite difficult. And the technique is important. You want to push forward. You want to stay in that neutral alignment. You don't want to be taking that machine and going from side to side because just think of the back motion that you would be doing as well as the shoulder motion as well. So you're getting into any type of awkward posture and you want to maintain and service the equipment. The more we maintain and do preventative maintenance on any of our equipment, the easier it is to use among the operators. Now, when we look at motions like reaching and bending, occupational cleaners do this when they're mopping, sweeping, dusting, making beds, and cleaning surfaces like bathtubs or toilets and shoveling snow. So we're repeating some of these, but we're looking at them now in terms of the reaching and bending motions. So when you're mopping, what to consider is the mop handles themselves. If you have a short mop handle, it's going to increase the amount of bending, where if you have longer mop handles and your grip is at the top of that handle, you're going to have awkward shoulder postures because you're going to be abducting. You want to ensure your mop handle height is actually close to the worker's chest. And ideally, if the mop handle was adjustable, it would accommodate more workers. So if it's not something that's specific tool to one person, adjustability really is key. You want to use lightweight mops and you want to use lightweight mop heads. So this could be microfiber flat mops, tubes and string mops, but those traditional heavy cotton loop mops, which I think we've all seen, they're not necessarily recommended because they're really heavy and not only like they require kind of a lifting motion as well, and you get into more awkward postures. When you're actually mopping, the technique that you should be using is an S motion while you walk backwards. You want to mop, rinse, and dry small sections at a time. You don't want to, push forward, push back, and by all means, you don't want to walk forward because then you're walking into what you've just mopped. You want to use the appropriate mop head for the size of area that you're mopping as well. Sweeping. So with sweeping, you want to alternate hands. Anytime you can alternate hands in any cleaning task is advantageous. Again, these are gross motor type of movement. So because they're not precision, they are easier to switch up your hand. You want to look at the handle length. The optimal again is chest height, but ideally, same with mops, is if it is adjustable, especially if it's used by multiple users. You want to have the proper gripping material for the position of where the hands are. And you want to keep your upper arms close to your body. You want to actually move your feet more. As soon as you push the broom out in front of you and you don't move your feet, then you're causing your back to flex forward, your shoulders to outreach. Also, when it comes time to collecting the dust after you've swept, use something like the diagram here where it has a dustpan that has a handle on it that allows you to maintain that upright posture. And you may also want a separate broom to use in combination with this. When it comes to dusting, a lot of dusting has to be done overhead and on lower surfaces. So having an extendable dust tool is advantageous. Also, there are dust tools that you can create more of an angle at the top, like a 90-degree angle. And these types of tools allow for better postures of the trunk and the shoulders. Again, there's always that option that you can alternate between your right and left hands. When you're dusting using a hand cloth, what you want to keep in mind is you want to keep your wrist straight. You don't want to be doing a lot of unnecessary reaching and bending. So move your feet to the area in which you're cleaning. And you can also consider switching out the type of cloth that you're using to something that's more lightweight, like a microfiber cleaning cloth. And again, you can switch hands, but you want to really just make sure you are able to be in neutral posture as much as possible. When you're making the beds, again, we had talked about that mattress lifting tool, but in combination with that, you don't want to use that mattress lifting tool and then bend over at the corners of the mattress in order to secure the fitted sheet around it. What you want to do is you want to maintain a straight back. So either you can kneel, you can crouch, you can kneel on one knee, and you want to get close to it so then you're not reaching over. And you want to make sure that it also is not as close to the wall and that you have a space around whatever it is that you're working on in general. When you're in a confined space, you tend to assume awkward postures. So I know sometimes this is out of our control, but if there is space around it, it does allow us to get in a better posture. When we're looking at cleaning surfaces, the examples I give here are in a bathroom. You want to make sure that you can get close to whatever it is you're cleaning. So in the top picture here, you see the lady getting in the tub rather than reaching from outside the tub to clean the walls. This is allowing for neutral postures of the back. You can also use extendable tools as well. Again, this allows for neutral postures of the back and shoulder. The lady at the bottom cleaning the toilets, when you have an extendable brush with an angled head on it, it's allowing for better postures. You see a lot of bending over in cleaning bathrooms as well as custodians in say like primary or kindergarten classrooms because the furniture is so much lower. So having long handled or adjustable handled tools to clean the different surfaces in this area are very advantageous. So this is just another diagram of different tools that can be used to clean surfaces. Again, you can alternate between your right and left hands when you're using these types of tools. And sometimes, especially in the washrooms, to clean a bathtub, occupational cleaners might need to kneel to get into a better posture. Make sure on these hard surfaces, in order to reduce that contact stress, that you use either a mat or a towel under your knees. In shoveling snow, you want to stabilize that spinal posture with appropriate hand placement. So you want to have one hand on the handle and one about 12 inches lower. And this just allows you to maintain your back upright and straight. You want to avoid any excessive arm movement. You do not want to twist or move your feet. And again, you want to keep that shovel close to your body so you're not bending. And you do not want to throw the snow over your shoulder. So it's all about maintaining that center of gravity and keeping the shovel close to your body and not extending in order to reach and dump the snow. When we look at vibration, there's two sources of vibration. There's hand-arm vibration and there's whole body vibration. In occupational cleaners, we often see hand-arm vibration when you're using different walk-behind scrubbers or rotary buffers. And whole body vibration occurs on any of those ride-on machines. So a sweeper, a floor waxer, anything like that. So when we're looking at hand-arm vibration, you want to make sure that you let the machine do the work. You want to keep a light hold on the controls, and because the more tightly we grip something, the greater the force and the vibration that's going to be emitted through the fingers and hands. Try using the machine on low speed when possible because the frequency is going to be reduced, and replace the polishing disc regularly. Again, having that preventative maintenance on machines. When we use preventative maintenance and make sure everything is in working order, it's going to be easier to use among the employees. You can also use anti-vibrating vibration gloves. That's going to allow us for some absorption of low frequency vibration, but keep in mind when it comes to wearing gloves, you want to have the proper fitting gloves. There's not a one size that fits all. And ways to reduce whole body vibration would be to limit the time spent on these types of machines. So you could vary the tasks that are done. You can also isolate what's being the vibrating source or surface in order to reduce the exposure. You want to ensure again that the equipment's maintained in order to avoid that excessive vibration. And there's a potential for installing vibration dampening seats. And finally, task variation. A lot of times we can't control necessarily the tasks that have to be done. So a way to reduce our exposure at one time would be to have task variation. So splitting up tasks in order to provide some rest to different muscle groups. So for example, hotel housekeepers often are cleaning one room at a time. If there's more physically demanding tasks, try to alternate them between some different low demanding or some of the easier tasks. So that way you're not doing all the hard tasks at once, then all the easiest tasks, and it's giving your muscles a break. And the same with school custodians. They're often given a group of classrooms to clean, and you have to do similar duties in all of them. But don't just go out and sweep all at one time, then mop all at one time, then dust all at one time. Try to vary these tasks within the work cycle. Well, I agree to a certain extent because I'm really focusing on the tools that can be used. But I think a lot like occupational cleaners, you can't really avoid some of the surfaces that need to be cleaned and the location of them per se. But I have gone to a lot in previous jobs that they're just not even given the proper equipment to do their jobs. So I think, if you start there and making sure, they have these extendable tools, maybe have the ability to vary their task a little bit more throughout the day. I know there's some different types of automated processes that can be done. But when it comes to moving furniture and stuff like that, like especially when you look at school custodians, a lot of that is done like in the summer, and I've seen a lot of injuries occur from that. So it's definitely a learning point. I'm not entirely sure at the systems level what can be done other than making sure they're given the proper training to, and again that goes on the employee, but and the proper equipment, having the preventative maintenance on machines. A lot of times things that are used in these occupational cleaning environments, they're not updated that often.
Great. Thank you.